In Japan, some houses are hijacked by an aggressive army of yellow hornets. Ruled by a single queen, these incredible insects can transform paper pulp into a fortified palace. Inside, there's enough room for the queen to raise a sisterhood of 7,000 stormtroopers to defend the palace and scour the district, slaughtering the innocent. Can anything stand in the way of this army of Japanese yellow hornets and their tyrant queen? Japan is famous for packing lots of people into small spaces. Super cities like Tokyo teem with busy workers. But out in the countryside, there's another kind of thriving metropolis. It's a high-rise full of very angry workers. They don't labour in the rice paddies or vegetable gardens. In fact, at the start of spring, most people don't even know they're there. Having slept through the long winter, as the sun warms the forest, their leader starts to make a move. Little does this gardener know that soon he'll be sharing his property with royalty. This abandoned bird nesting box is a home fit for a queen. A queen Japanese yellow hornet. She's pregnant and has already started building herself a nest. By chewing tree bark into a pulp, she moulds herself a papier-mâché palace. Within the protective sphere, the queen deposits an egg into each of 50 cells. They'll hatch in a week, and she'll have 50 larvae, all of them hungry. So the queen goes hunting for food. Most animals stay well clear of a beehive. Intruders looking for honey are attacked by a stinging swarm. But the hornet queen doesn't have a sweet tooth. She feeds on flesh. She avoids the hive's defense system by targeting foraging bees returning to the nest. A honeybee's no match for the queen's powerful jaws and lethal sting. She dismembers her victim, discarding the wings, legs and head. She's only interested in the thorax, packed with protein-rich flight muscles. She chews it into a meatball to feed her fat grubs. For the next 2 weeks, the queen hunts alone. But then, the first of her grubs emerge from their cocoons. This is the first of many females, because the queen only produces daughters. Gradually, this sisterhood takes over all the tasks of looking after the hive, which is why they're called workers. Unlike the queen, they'll never breed. They're ruled by a tyrant. The queen spreads chemicals to prevent her daughters from laying eggs. Freed from domestic duties, the queen concentrates on building her army of daughters. She'll lay up to 12,000 eggs in the next few weeks. But there's a problem. The nest box is too small for the queen's rapidly expanding empire. Already the queen has over 100 daughters, but will soon need room for 100 times that number. It's time to build a bigger palace. The question is, where? scouts are dispatched to find a building site. In the wild, hornets can nest inside hollow trees or underground cavities. But just like in this nest box, if the space is too small, it's time to move out. The scouts are searching for somewhere protected from rain and wind, but open enough to allow the nest to expand. There are signs that previous generations of hornets have nested under the eaves of this house. But the scouts keep looking, trying to identify the perfect location. Eventually, the scouts agree on a building site, and work begins creating a papier-mâché anchor point for the new nest. It's not a moment too soon, because the old palace is bulging at the seams. Fortunately, the construction crew doesn't have far to travel to the new building site. An advance guard quickly molds enough cells for 50 eggs. Then, the Tyrant Queen makes her move. Her daughters pause only long enough for her to deposit an egg in each cell, and then construction continues. In just 3 days, they create a nest as big as a softball. In 3 weeks, it'll be a giant fortress. At this time of year, abandoned nests are common. Why do the hornets make so many false starts? The answer is that back in spring, a single queen's priority is to find a site that's secure and warm. An old boot is perfect for one hornet. But when there's an army of 1,000, they generate their own warmth and provide their own protection. So all the hornets need is room to grow. The growing nest is exposed under the eaves of the house, but its construction provides protection from predators and the weather. The nest has a single entrance that can be easily defended. And the walls are wonderfully insulated. Pockets of air in the papier-mâché keep the heat in and the cold out. The hardest part is keeping up with the demand for building materials. A steady stream of workers shuttles between the nest and a tree in the garden. Powerful jaws strip off the bark and chew it into a sticky paper dumpling, mixing it with saliva. Then it's back to the nest, where the dumplings smeared onto the walls and moulded into shape. Different workers collect bark from different parts of the tree. Slight colour variations in the wood fibres decorate the nest with swirling stripes. As semicircular pockets are added on top of each other, the nest quickly grows bigger. But there's even more construction happening inside the nest. The workers have transformed it into a vast maternity ward. Driven on by the Tyrant Queen's rampant fertility, the workers have organised the nest into combs, layer upon layer of cells for raising her babies. Large nests are fed thousands of insects every day. This worker is preparing a meal for the hungry hordes. It chews the prey, but it doesn't swallow the meatball. An adult worker gets the energy it needs from sugary fluids, like tree sap. The protein-rich pap is for the larvae. Lines of larvae beg to be fed by gnawing at the sides of their cells. The scratching sounds signal they're hungry. The larvae digest the meatballs and form a living food store. When bad weather confines raiding parties to the nest, the larvae regurgitate a nutritious liquid to sustain the workers and the queen. The Tyrant is still going strong. Her nest, now containing 10,000 workers and larvae, is as big as a beer keg, but it remains firmly glued in place with dried papier-mâché. With the arrival of autumn, the queen faces her biggest challenge. The yellow hornet is not the most terrifying insect in the skies of Japan. There's a monster that kills about 70 people each year, and it's discovered the nest of the Tyrant Queen. The giant hornet is twice the size of the defending workers, and is armed with a 6mm sting and enormous jaws. In just a few hours, a handful of giant hornets could wipe out a nest of their smaller cousins. The enormous insects carry away grubs to feed their own larvae. But the yellow hornets are not defenseless. A chemical alarm goes out, and all the hornets in the district scramble to attack the giants. By painting hornets from different colonies different colours, scientists discovered that yellow hornet nests gang together to fight off the giant invaders. Thanks to overwhelming numbers, the giants are destroyed. However, as autumn heads into winter, the hornet colony faces an even bigger challenge. Cold kills insects. But the hornets are still very much alive. They've found a way to survive the frosty nights. To discover their survival secret, scientists sliced open a nest and viewed it with a thermograph. This camera makes cool areas look blue and warm places appear red. Outside the nest, the chilly air is 13 degrees, but inside the temperature is a tropical 30 degrees. The heat generated by the busy insects is trapped inside the nest. The papier-mâché walls act like a duvet, trapping pockets of air to insulate the nest and keep the hornets warm. That means when they leave the nest, the hornets have enough heat in their bodies to remain active, despite the chill winter air. This gives them a huge advantage over solitary insects that must endure low temperatures alone. The hornet nest is at the peak of its powers. It's a massive fortress, safe from attack by predators and insulated against the cold. But deep within the nest, the tyrant queen is in trouble. Exhausted by the demands of laying more than 10,000 eggs, the queen starts producing very different offspring. So far, all the fat grubs have developed into female workers, unable to reproduce. But now, the tyrant queen lays eggs that will develop into males, called drones, and sexually active females, the next generation of queens. These larvae form much bigger cocoons than the standard hornet worker. And when they hatch, the young males and queens get treated like royalty. Once they've emerged from their cocoons, this new reproductive generation becomes the focus of the entire colony. The thousands of workers concentrate all their efforts on feeding this new royal family. They gradually neglect the old tyrant. Eventually, she'll leave the nest unnoticed and, exhausted from her efforts, die alone in the wilderness. About 1,000 new queens emerge into the nest. The young royals just sit on the comb. They do nothing to help the colony. Workers look after their every need, stuffing them with protein and carbohydrates. Any other larvae still in the cells are ignored and will eventually starve to death and fall out of their cells. Without a new supply of willing workers, the hornet nest is doomed. A fine winter's day signals the end of the colony. It's easy to see that strange things are happening to the hornets. Responding to some mysterious signal, the males all begin to leave the nest. They swarm around a nearby tree. Then, the young queens make their royal exit. Like the males, they'll never return. The sky is filled with a frantic orgy of meeting and mating. It rains coupling hornets. This is the only really useful thing a male does in his short life. Within hours, he'll be dead. And in a few weeks, the rest of the Tyrant Queen's massive empire will have collapsed. A few loyal workers continue to follow their programmed behavior patterns until killed by cold and starvation. Despite all the work that's gone into it, hornets will never use this nest again. But the Tyrant Queen's legacy continues through winter. After mating, the next generation of young queens heads into the forest to seek shelter from the cold. Hidden inside a log, a hibernating queen sleeps through the winter. Inside her abdomen are the eggs she'll use to create a new army of workers. When she awakes, warmed by the sunshine of spring, she'll establish a new fortress, found a new sisterhood, and rule as a tyrant.